Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Sonship Review Part 7, and this is session 33. When we left off last time, the last verse that we read was in Psalm 74, where it talked about breaking the heads of Leviathan in the waters and giving him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. Now let me just make sure that we're all kind of on the same page here. What we have here in this section of Romans chapter 9, in verses 14 to 18, this is the second objection that the believing remnant is making, because Paul has now been teaching that God has interrupted what he was doing with the nation of Israel. He has brought in a dispensation of Gentile grace. He is now working. Look, I'm saying that, but look, let me just back up one step further if I can. All the way back in the Old Testament, all the way back to the Abrahamic covenant. Do you remember what God said to Abram out there? He says, I'll make of thee a great nation, and I'll multiply your seed as the sand of the seashore and as the stars of heaven. But in all the times that he talks to Abraham about that covenant, he also says this, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Well, look, you've got a world that's only divided into two parts, and you've got this, just for the sake of simplicity, you've got this Jew and Gentile issue. Well, Abram is a Gentile, but he is going to be the father of a nation that's going to be separate from, unique from, all the other people groups of the world. I mean, back before him, you're not really talking about Jew and Gentile. There is no Jew. Everybody's just what they are. So what happens? Then, of course, so we're going to start this with Abram, and I'm just really doing that because it's easier to write that than Abraham. It's quicker. And then, of course, then you have Isaac who comes, there you go. Then you have Isaac who comes along, and remember, they're too old to have children. So this is a son. It is Abraham and Sarah, but this is a son of God's creation. And so this is from him is going to be a unique people. That covenant is going to be reaffirmed with Isaac. It's going to be reaffirmed with Jacob. From Jacob comes the 12 tribes. And so then you have the unfolding of this program with Israel. As that begins to unfold, look, and all through in that Old Testament, we could say it very briefly. In the Old Testament, you have 17 books that starts with Genesis, and that comprises the first section of your Old Testament. And then you have 5 books that come along in the middle. It starts with Job, and so this starts with Genesis, and this starts with Job, and you've got those 5, what are normally referred to as the poetic books, okay, Job and Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and all. And then you got 17 books that wind it up, and those are the prophets. And that is going to start with Isaiah, and that's going to run all the way to Malachi. All right, now the reason I'm saying that to you is because now you get this whole program in effect there. We learned, and I'm not putting this timeline up there, but we learned back there in Leviticus chapter 26, we got Israel's whole history in a single chapter, the 5 courses of punishment. We didn't get all of the details, but we got a large overview of their entire history, all the way up to the time that they're carried away captive. Something I ought to say about that is I'm kind of laying the groundwork for this, and let's do it like this, and Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River, and then here's the Dead Sea like this. Jerusalem sits about right here, and you remember after the death of Solomon, then the kingdom is going to be divided. That's part of that, what's happening with that, and so just to kind of swoop a line across here, that northern kingdom of Israel is up here, and the southern kingdom of Judah with the 2 tribes of Judah and Benjamin. And by the way, let me just say it like this. When you survey the kings of Israel, you don't really have a righteous king in all of the kings of Israel. You do have a guy that comes in, and he does do some things, but he does not consistently follow the Lord. And when they go away captive to Assyria. And that actually culminates in about 722 BC. So they've got about a 200-year history None of those kings really served the Lord, and the reason I bring that part up is because as a context for all we're going to be talking about here, everybody, look, you remember Jeroboam. Remember that was the guy that was going to become the king. He sets up the capital in Shechem, and he's going to, and he puts together 2 golden calves. You remember? He's got one down here in the central part, and then he's got one up here in Dan. That was the northernmost tribe up there. And what he didn't want is he didn't want everybody coming down here to Jerusalem to re-engage. And remember, there's 3 feast days during the year. You're going to have to come back and go to Jerusalem and all that's supposed to do that. He didn't want that happening. So what he does is he sets up these golden calves, and he makes his own priesthood, and he's got all of that happening so that he's got his own thing going up here that is sort of a replica in his mind of what God has going on down here. And as a result, from the beginning, all of the people that are up here that would be considered that would be considered righteous. In other words, they have a heart for God and they really want to follow Him. Those people migrate down to Judah. So what you really have left up here are the people who are ripe for this kind of counterfeit religion that Jeroboam has imposed upon the northern kingdom. All right, well, I'm saying all that to say that they get carried away into Syria. Then it's over a century later. It's about 125 years later that Judah now is going to be carried away captive into Babylon. But there's a point here for me to say that I've never said to you before, and that is when you start looking at the timeline of events and the things that are going to be happening, even though it happens with the northern kingdom and Assyria, and then over a century later, it is almost as though, well, it's not almost, it is, that what's happening with the northern kingdom is sort of a warning over and over to the southern kingdom. Do you see what I did with that? You guys are going to, if you're going to cross the line, and then that's going to be the end of that. When they go away captive into Babylon, of course, even the righteous are going to go away captive with them. You got a guy called Daniel over there. And so to Daniel, he is given a very concise timeline of events of how things are going to go. But what no one saw coming was that there was going to be an interruption of a dispensation of Gentile grace. And I got on all this to now draw this together to say, all the way back in their scriptures, and even to those prophets that are giving all the timeline details, they're not talking, any of them, about that mystery that God kept hidden from the foundation of the world. There was a plan that out in eternity, after Israel had become that great nation and now are the fulfillers of that Abrahamic covenant, then through them, the blessings would flow to the Gentiles. And that's why I quoted that a while ago. In these shall all the families of the earth be blessed. But the Gentiles were never going to go around Israel to get the blessings from God. Those were going to be dealt through the agency of Israel. They understood that. They understood that. And so when suddenly Paul appears, and now he starts preaching that God has interrupted, well, he doesn't use that word interrupt, actually. It's the word I'm using because it's the accurate word to describe that. But he says to them, God's not working with you in your program anymore. And the status that Israel now has is that of being accursed. And that's not accursed in the sense that they're going to pay for the debt and penalty of their sins in the lake of fire or go to hell or anything like that. This word accursed, do you remember we went back in the Old Testament and we looked at that word and the Bible defined that in that God is no longer with you. He's not doing those things that He used to do. That kind of came out of nowhere as far as the Hebrew people were concerned. Many of them, no doubt, did not believe that. Even those that thought it might be true were now wondering some things. And it was very unsettling to them. It was almost like, wait a minute, there's some things happening here no one's ever talked about. It's not sitting back in the prophets, and no one knew it. I've never heard anybody, and that would be true. And so they have some questions. These questions actually come in the form of objections. So you had that first objection that we covered the last time, and today we're going to come to the end of the second objection. And the second objection runs like this. You have in verse 14, you have that objection about there being unrighteous, about God being unrighteous. And we'll talk about that in just a moment, just to kind of get us all thinking about what we're looking at here. And then in verses 15 and 16, that is Paul's first answer to that objection. And he is going to use the character of Moses and quote something back in Moses' life to answer the fact that that objection, and by the way, when they talk about is there unrighteousness with God, they're not talking about necessarily. Remember, this is the members of the believing remnant. This is the little flock. These are people who believe that Jesus Christ is the Christ that the prophets all pointed to, that would show up one day. That's very interesting. When I'm studying this thing out, there's all kinds of rabbit trails that appear. And I never take them. But yeah, I know. Right. But here's the thing. Do you remember when over there where after Paul gets saved on the Damascus Road, and then he goes, remember he's blind, and he gets his sight back. Before he goes to Arabia, he goes into the synagogues, and he argues that undeniably that historical figure of Jesus of Nazareth was the Christ that the Old Testament prophets. Here's what I almost did this rabbit trail on for you, but instead I'll just wait and do it in a bare bones. But would you like to know what scripture he used to prove that? Standing in the front of a Jewish synagogue and proving undeniably that that guy that y'all crucified was the prophesied Messiah for Israel. This is great. This is really good stuff, because there's only one place you can go in their scriptures. What's funny is when he says when it says that he did this from their scriptures, it doesn't give you the reference. There's only one place you can go that will undeniably prove that that's who he was. Anyway, well,
the one they won't use today.
They definitely won't use that today. All right, so they're hearing this and now they're objecting. And why? Because they know, remember up there in Romans, in Romans chapter 9 and verses 2 and 3 and 4, remember Paul is talking about all the things that are pertinent to God working with them. Remember, to whom pertaineth the adoption and the glory and the covenants and the promises of God and the service of God. Remember, he did all that list of things? Hey, they're looking at that and they're saying, hey, we haven't gotten all that yet. He can't stop doing what he's doing. That's not right. And so here comes the objections. Now we're in the second objection that says, not that God is unrighteous in the sense that he is being sinful, but that he is being unrighteous in the sense that he is being unfair, because you can't stop doing what you're doing with us in order to do this other thing with Gentiles, because you didn't finish. That's the charge. So that first answer is in 15 and 16, and then he comes along, which is where we are now, in 17 and 18, and that's the second answer. And that is going to concern the figure of Pharaoh and something that God is doing with him. Why am I taking the trouble to tell you this when it's not in your notes? Because I don't want you to forget why we're at where we are. So what we did when we got there in Romans 9 is I took you back to the place that Paul is quoting about, for this same purpose have I raised up Pharaoh, that I might show my power in him, that my name might be declared throughout all the earth. He's doing something with Pharaoh. And that is the second part of Paul's answer. And then when you get into this next part here in verses 19 to 29, which is going to take you to the end of the chapter, that is going to be the third objection. And then Paul is going to give a two-part answer to that as well. All right, now I'm just trying to show you that's the flow of the chapter. Everybody with me so far? All right, so as he's getting ready to do this, now we're going to we went back and we looked at that Red Sea crossing, right? So if this was the land up here, well, here's what you have up here. You have this little finger of the Red Sea that goes like this, and you have one over here. You have the Gulf of Aqaba and the Gulf of Suez over here. And then there's that big debate. Is Sinai sitting right here, or is it sitting over here in Arabia? My only point was, when they come from the land of Goshen over here, that Nile splits off and goes like this. This is the land of Goshen in Egypt right here. If they're going to go to the land, they're just going to go this way. Or even if you're going to go around the Dead Sea, which they did. They came in this way, see, from this side of the Jordan. But instead, what they did is they either went this way and crossed and went to that Sinai, but if that's it, then they would have gone this way and crossed. Whichever one of these it is, and it's not important for our discussion today to try to figure out exactly which one that is, because there's a couple of different things that make me think differently about that. So honestly, I don't know. I'm aware of the passage about Sinai and Arabia and all of that, but I'm also aware that when Moses is over there keeping his father-in-law's flocks, he is on the back side of the desert, which is always the west side, which would have put him right there. So I don't know. You know what? I just haven't figured it out. And to be honest with you, I just haven't devoted a day to do anything about that. Maybe one day I will, but the point remains the same. When God takes them, that He raises up Moses, and what is He going to do? Deliver them out of the land of Egypt, and He's going to get them into the land of promise. But in the midst of doing that, there's the plagues, and then out they go. And now, you know what? They get up against the Red Sea, and Pharaoh and his army is hot on their heels. And now I'm up to where we were last week. You remember what happened? That he parted those waters in heaps on either side, and they crossed over on dry ground. And that was at the very site where the pit was going to be opened up. But remember what the Bible said about that? God congealed the depths. And they weren't, and he's not just talking about what He did with the waters that are piled up. He's talking about the fact, look, the bottom of that Red Sea would have been nothing but muck and mire and mud. The Bible says they went across on dry ground. And then we defined that word congealed that the Bible used there. And you know what it talked about? Taking something from a liquid into a solid state. You remember that? And so Satan can't get that. They're crossing across there. He's going to open up the pit, but he can't. They get all the way across, and then as soon as the pillar of fire lifts, here comes Pharaoh and his army. They come down into there, and then God is going to do a couple of things. Now look, I know I've kind of gotten off of the notes here just a little bit, but I am on these notes here. So what I want to do is leave that right there, because this is going to pick up in just a page. So now, having done that, let's give us this first verse here. And that is going to be what? Isaiah chapter 51 and verse 9. Awake, awake. Put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in the ancient days, in the generations of old. Art thou not it that hath cut Rahab and wounded the dragon? Rahab is not the synonym for the dragon here. We're talking about two different entities here. Art thou not it which hath dried the sea, the waters of the great deep, that hath made the depths of the sea a way for the ransom to pass over? And now we'll go to Psalm 89 and read verse 10. Thou hast broken Rahab in pieces as one that is slain. Thou hast scattered thine enemies with thy strong arm. And when we talk about the Lord's strong arm, we're talking about the same thing as when the Bible talks about His right hand. We're talking about His glorious power being exhibited through what is being done. Now, in these two passages, we have that mention of Rahab. And Rahab is slain here. And because of that, there is something that God is doing here. And I talked to you about this, that one of the men in Monahans was talking about. That would be the sentinel, he thought, that would be placed there at the entrance to the pit. That may very well be so. I thought that was a good idea. But we need to pick back up on the people crossing the Red Sea, because you remember there were two issues there. One of those is when those waters came back together, the Israelites saw the bodies of the Egyptians washed up on the seashore. Yet the Bible turns right around and talks about the army of Pharaoh as sinking as a stone into the depths. And I was telling you that was not just the depths of the waters, but that was actually the depths of the pit, because God is doing a couple of things there by doing that. So let's put all this together and just run through this for what we have so far. Number one is the adversary. Give me this next. There you go. So the adversary has the keys to the pit. Remember, all the way up until the time of the battle on the cross, he has the keys of death and hell. But after that battle on the cross, he doesn't anymore. Now those belong to the Lord from then on. All right, give me this next one. Thanks, Trent. Israel is crossing at the very place of the entrance to the pit. Number three, Satan's stronghold is in this Red Sea, where he, as Leviathan, has power because of the entrance to the pit. He has power because as the prince of the earth, he also at that time had power over death. And that was what he was going to do, is destroy Israel in that Red Sea. Here's the next one. Thank you. Okay, he'll wait until Israel's over the pit. He'll open it up, and then he will devour the people. The next one is, it is his stronghold. And I'm saying to you, he has been driven to this in his rage. It is because of not just the plagues and the things that have happened there, but also now because of everything that has led up to this place. And God is not through prodding him into a fury that is finally going to culminate at the cross. Yes, it's a long ways off, but Satan's not looking at time like you and I do. We look at it where we're upset about something, but with the passing of time, we cool off. That is not the way Satan is going to do that, and God is going to take him in his own craftiness, but he needs this adversary to be infuriated to be able to do that. And that's exactly what's going on here. Okay, this next one, please, Trent. All right, but he is unable to open the pit when Israel is crossing over, because the Lord congealed the depths in the heart of the sea so that that pit could not be opened. And then lastly, once Pharaoh and his army are in the midst of the sea, God does two things. He crashes the waters down upon them. That drowns them and kills them. And he opens the pit for the dead to go down into it. And so now what I want to do is I want to pick up this Exodus passage and continue reading. So now we're really where we need to be. Exodus 15:9. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My lust shall be satisfied upon them. I will draw my sword. My hand shall destroy them. Does that remind you of anything? Like the I wills of Isaiah 14, isn't it? I will ascend above the stars of God. I will put my throne. I will. Well, I just see the same thing happening here. That's not just in the heart of Pharaoh, but that is in the heart of the adversary as well. And now verse 10. Thou didst blow with thy wind. The sea covered them. They sank as lead in the mighty waters. And remember, I was talking to you about that being their souls and spirits, because we saw that their bodies were up on the seashore. And just in case there's any doubt about that not being them sinking to the bottom of the waters, but actually descending down into the pit, this is the verse I waited till the end to show you. Verse 11, who is like unto thee, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like thee, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? Thou stretched out thy right hand, the earth swallowed them. See, that's not just talking about the waters of the Red Sea. That's talking about the earth swallowing them. Well, look, it can't be just talking about their bodies, because there's their bodies on the seashore. That's their souls and spirits that are going down into the pit. Not the first time, by the way, that the earth has opened up and people have been swallowed down into it. All right, now this is going to bring us back to Romans chapter 9. We're going to pick up this last verse in the passage where we're discussing the second objection. The second objection that I didn't do that, did I? This is the second objection and Paul's second answer to that. And so we're speaking about Pharaoh. So let's do it. Romans chapter 9, verse 18. He says this about Pharaoh. By the way, he's already said something about him in verse 17. But now in 18, I wanted to focus on a more prickly part of the verse, because it says, therefore hath he mercy on whom he'll have mercy, and on whom he will he hardeneth. And that reminds us a lot of the old Calvinistic doctrine that said God decides who he'll be merciful to, and if he wants to harden someone's heart and make them his enemy, then he'll do that. And it is though the ones having mercy or being hardened have nothing to do with it. This is just an arbitrary act on the part of God to do whatever he wants to do. And that gets defended by saying God is sovereign and he's the creator and he can do whatever he wants to do. No, he cannot be unrighteous. I'm sorry, he cannot. I'm not saying he wants to be, but I'm saying God cannot oppose himself. He cannot lie. He cannot be unrighteous. And that's exactly what the Calvinistic doctrine is making out of this right here. So I'm going to step aside here just for a moment and say that this thing that we're looking at here with Pharaoh, hey, God's first purpose is to deliver them out of Egypt and take them into the promised land. But in the midst of doing that, he stopped doing that first. This is the question you were writing to me about. His first purpose, remember what he says to Moses? You know, he said, I raised you up to be a deliverer for the people. But at the same time, God knows there is something else he needs to do. So he stops doing all of this. They may be out of Egypt, but they're not into the land yet. And he takes them in the very opposite direction. The secondary purpose has to do with God, through his actions with Pharaoh, sending a message to Satan about the contention that he is involved with the adversary. And that message is going to be, and that message is not only meant to say to Pharaoh, hey, I know who Pharaoh is. He's your guy. He was the Assyrian, remember, brought in. I know what his army is a picture of. It's a picture of your angels. But what I'm going to do to him, I'm also going to do to you, Satan. And then there's this incident here at the crossing of the Red Sea where Satan is so enraged about the fact that God kept him from opening the pit on Israel, but yet killed and opened the pit on his guys, his human representatives on the earth. He is all enraged about that. Now, I know my timer went off, but I need to take a minute because there's a couple of issues that I want to talk to us about here that I think are very important. What Paul is saying is, just as there was an original purpose that got interrupted for God to accomplish a second purpose that had direct bearing on the adversary, when Israel's program is coming along. Remember, we talked about all of this? So here's the timeline. Israel's program is coming along, and then suddenly Paul is saying God has interrupted that timeline of events and began to do something else. But it is for this reason. Here's this first purpose that God is accomplishing with the nation of Israel. But he interrupted that to bring about a secondary purpose. And this secondary purpose is going to be for the purposes... What is he going to use Israel to do? Reconcile what part of the creation? All right, he's going to reconcile the earth with them. But when he's talking about now doing from Jew and Gentile the one new man, the church, the body of Christ, now we're talking about reconciling what part of the creation? Thank you, the heavens. God's going to reconcile it all, the heavens and the earth. And when that is over, he will do exactly what he did back here. He will resume that original purpose and bring it to a completion. And when God got through doing this thing with Pharaoh, guess what he did? He went right back to that original purpose now and was going to bring it to a fulfillment. In other words, Paul is looking at them and saying, if you know what happened back there, what God's doing by interrupting to do this should not be that strange to you. You should be able to see that. But God is working in a very different way. Now, we're not going to turn to it because I'm out of time here. It's not in your notes, but I meant to say it. But look, during this dispensation of Gentile grace, God is working very differently than He was during His program with Israel. But even during His program with Israel, we don't think about that correctly. I am going to have you turn to it. Hebrews 11. We'll just turn to one of them, and then we'll stop and start the second session. But in Hebrews chapter 11, and by the way, that word Hebrews kind of to be a tip-off about what's going on with that. Hebrews chapter 11, and I want to show you because, here's why I'm bringing this up. Because when I grew up in church, and I did, going to church every time the door was open, here's the way this Red Sea thing got taught to me. If you love the Lord and you follow Him, then if you ever get in a tough spot, God will do for you just what He did for the children of Israel at the Red Sea. He will make a way to deliver you, and He will make sure that the bad guys get punished. And didn't the whole world kind of have that thing in their mind? Because that's what people do. When bad things are happening to them, they think, oh, I don't know why God's mad at me. I don't understand what's happening. Or we'll look at our life. Look, and this is a sincere thing. I don't mean to make fun of this. But there have been times in my own life when I've looked at myself because things weren't going well, and I thought, God must be punishing me here, and I need to do an inventory and take stock and see what needs to change. I would discover something, which, by the way, it was me. It wasn't that hard to do. But I'd find something that God evidently wasn't very happy with, and then I'd go fix it, expecting what? That the circumstances would turn themselves around. And see, we all kind of thought that way. And so I just want to show you, that's not only not the way it works in the dispensation of Gentile grace, it wasn't always that way in Israel's program. Take a look with me in Hebrews chapter 11, and I'm going to turn your attention here at about verse 36. And by the way, this is talking about the remnant who are going to find themselves out there in the day of wrath under the boot of the Antichrist. But look what it says here, verse 36. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings. You know what scourging is? That's that cat o' nine tails. They just rip the flesh right off their bones. Yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. I can hear someone saying it now. Don't worry, you're not going to prison. God's not going to let you go to prison. Well, the Bible here says they sure did. How about 37? They were stoned. They were sawn asunder. I was studying last week in the prophet Hosea. That's an unbelievable book. But there's a couple things you need to understand about that book. We will have a chance to talk about it in the not too distant future. But Hosea was one of those guys that by Jewish tradition, because he violated the king at that time, king of Judah, as a matter of fact, at that time, he was actually placed inside of a hollow log, and then the whole thing was sawn in half. And they believe that that passage in Hebrews 11 is actually referring to that event. Well, what I'm going to say to you is, he and the only one. They, not he. And so let's keep reading it here. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. Don't worry. God's going to protect you like He did the children of Israel when they crossed the Red Sea. I'm going to tell you what, they got hacked to pieces. How about this one? They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins. Don't worry, God's going to make you rich. All you have to do is trust Him, right? I'm going to say something about that in just a second. And go, huh? Yeah, okay. Okay. And okay, don't forget that. That's right. And goatskins, being destitute. What does destitute mean? Yeah, you don't have anything. Afflicted, tormented. We can stop reading there. I just want to say it like this. The world looks at this. I see there are these billboards. We make that drive, out here on Tuesday. I saw a billboard today. It says, real Christians obey the words of Jesus. I know where that comes from. I used to, there'd have been a time I'd have read that and I said, yeah. But I didn't understand right division when I would have said that. Well, here's the thing. That prosperity gospel, you ever notice every bit of that comes out of the Old Testament, but when you get into the Gospels, during the earthly ministry of Jesus, here's what he says, go sell what you have, give the money to the poor, and come follow me. Nobody preaches the prosperity gospel out of the book of Matthew because that doesn't suit the message. But wait a minute, I thought real Christians obeyed the words of Jesus. Really? Did you worship on the Sabbath this week? That's Saturday, by the way. That's the 7th day. Sunday's the first day of the week. All you have to do is look at a calendar. Oh, but we're going to obey the words of Jesus. Travel more than a mile from your home. Are you going to eat a ham sandwich? Did you have bacon for breakfast? Come on. That's, you know what? That's, okay, I'm going to get all caught up in that and eat up my time for the next session. So we'll stop right here. We'll pick that up. Because I really like that ham. All right. Tell me when you're ready, Trent, and we'll pick it right